Now we are going to discuss meconium syndrome. What is meconium syndrome? It includes group of GI condition, GI gastrointestinal conditions associated with cystic fibrosis. Okay, so meconium syndrome, it includes group of GI conditions, gastrointestinal conditions associated with cystic fibrosis. Now see, in these GI conditions, there is overlap of clinical manifestations and management. So there is overlap of clinical features or manifestations and management options. Okay, see what's the problem in cystic fibrosis. So in cystic fibrosis, there is abnormal chloride transport. You must be knowing there is abnormal chloride transport, and because of that, there is tenacious secretions. Okay, so in cystic fibrosis, there is abnormal chloride transport, and because of this abnormal chloride transport, there is tenacious viscous secretions. Tenacious viscous secretions. Okay, cystic fibrosis is asked in medicine, in surgery, in pediatrics, in gynae. So see, it is going to affect multiple organs. Multiple organs are affected in or involved in cystic fibrosis. So see the list of organs which are affected in cystic fibrosis. So what are the organs affected? Organs affected in cystic fibrosis. So it's going to involve intestine, pancreas, lungs, salivary gland, reproductive organs, and biliary tract. We are bothered about gastrointestinal conditions. So what are the meconium syndrome manifestations? So meconium syndrome manifestation can lead to either meconium plug. So there is plug of meconium located in large bowel leading to large bowel obstruction, or it can cause meconium ileus in which there is small bowel obstruction. Okay, so see the meconium syndrome manifestations. Okay, so it varies from, first they can be meconium plug, and they can be meconium ileus. Okay, in meconium plug, there is presence of plug of meconium in the large bowel leading to large bowel obstruction, and ileus means it is related to small bowel. So there is small bowel obstruction in meconium ileus. It can be simple or complicated. What do you mean by complicated? Whenever it is complicated by perforation, it is known as complicated meconium ileus. One by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss the meconium plug. Now see these three images. Here you can see that there is presence of this meconium plug where in the descending colon and in sigmoid colon. Can you see? So this is what? This is descending colon and this is sigmoid. Clear? So there is presence of plug of meconium in the large bowel. So what happens? This meconium plug leads to large bowel obstruction. And how we are going to manage these patients? We have to give water soluble contrast enema, and whenever we give water soluble contrast enema, the patient is going to pass the meconium plug. So can you see how it looks like? So this is the appearance of meconium plug. 2-3 basic things. Generally this meconium plug is more common in preterm infants. Second, it leads to large bowel obstruction. That's why after birth these infants are having what? Abdominal distension. There is association of meconium plug with maternal hypothyroidism, Hirschsprung's disease, cystic fibrosis. So we are going to discuss in detail meconium plug. So it leads to large bowel obstruction, and in which patients? It leads to neonatal large bowel obstruction. Clear? Neonatal large bowel obstruction. In which cases it is more common? It is more common in preterm infants. Clear? And since there is large bowel obstruction, what's the manifestation? It leads to generalized abdominal distension. So after birth, in these infants, there is generalized abdominal distension. Meconium plug is associated with certain conditions. So see, what are the conditions with which meconium plug is associated? So it is associated with maternal diabetes, hypothyroidism, Hirschsprung's disease, and cystic fibrosis. How to remember? The mnemonic is MHC. So how to remember? It is MHC. Maternal diabetes, hypothyroidism, Hirschsprung's disease, and cystic fibrosis. Clinical manifestations that these patients after birth they develop what? Abdominal distension. There was a similar question in NEET PG related to Hirschsprung's disease. Yes, that was the most common manifestation of Hirschsprung's disease, and in this case also there is large bowel obstruction. So this leads to what? Abdominal distension. Clear? Now coming to the investigations. How we can make the diagnosis? Patient is having large bowel obstruction. So if we are taking this patient for abdominal X-ray, you will notice that there is presence of dilated bowel loops. Since it is large bowel, it is placed peripherally. So how we make the diagnosis? We go for abdominal X-ray, and on X-ray abdomen, what are the findings? Dilated bowel loops, dilated bowel loops. Clear? And these dilated bowel loops are placed peripherally. Another important point, which investigation is both diagnostic and therapeutic? So if we go for enema, on enema you will notice that there is dilated bowel loops. Clear? And it is therapeutic also. How? Because there is presence of the plug. So enema is hypertonic, it is going to attract water in the lumen and patient is going to pass that meconium plug. So investigation which is both diagnostic and therapeutic. This is frequently asked question, and this is water soluble contrast enema. Water soluble contrast enema. Okay, so this is water soluble contrast enema, which is both diagnostic and therapeutic. So in this picture you can see water soluble contrast enema has been given to the patient, and what happens? There is passage of meconium plug. So after enema there is passage of this meconium plug and there is relief of obstruction. So what? Obstruction is relieved. Obstruction is relieved. So this is how we manage the patients of meconium plug. Second is meconium ileus, right? And we discussed that in meconium ileus there is neonatal small bowel obstruction, and it is seen in which patients? Patients of cystic fibrosis. Meconium ileus is one of the earliest clinical manifestation of cystic fibrosis. So what's meconium ileus? Ileus means small bowel obstruction. So this is generally neonatal small bowel obstruction. Okay, meconium ileus. So it is seen in the patients of cystic fibrosis, right? So there is neonatal small bowel obstruction in the patients of cystic fibrosis, and see, very important point, it is the earliest clinical manifestation. This is earliest clinical manifestation of cystic fibrosis. Manifestation of cystic fibrosis. Now see, what are the problems in meconium ileus? Now see this image. Here you can see that there is inspissated meconium located in the terminal ileum or distal part of ileum. There is presence of inspissated meconium, and because of this inspissated meconium there is complete small bowel obstruction. What kind of obstruction? Complete small bowel obstruction. And whenever there is intestinal obstruction, you know that proximal part is dilated or distended and the distal part is collapsed. So here you can see that there is dilated small intestine. So proximal part of small intestine, it's dilated. Clear? Now see the part which is distal to the obstruction, and that's the colon. If you follow, this is the normal outline of colon. Can you see? This is the normal outline of the colon. Normal outline. But here you see that colon is narrow. So because of this obstruction, what happens? The distal part is collapsed. So two important findings: obstruction is located in the terminal ileum. It is because of inspissated meconium. Proximal part is dilated, distal part is collapsed. So in these patients you are going to find narrow or relatively small colon. So this is what meconium ileus. This meconium ileus is further divided into two types. And what are the types? It is simple, it can be simple, or it can be complicated. Okay, so whenever meconium ileus is complicated by perforation, it is known as complicated meconium ileus. One by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss simple meconium ileus. So in this image again you can see that there is presence of inspissated meconium, pillets of meconium into the terminal ileum, and you can see that there is distended proximal part of small intestine, and you can see that there is narrow colon. There is narrow colon. So what are the findings here? There is presence of inspissated meconium in the terminal ileum, and because of this inspissated meconium in the terminal ileum, there is complete small bowel obstruction, and because of this obstruction, the proximal part, so proximal part of small intestine, and that's distended. Simple, it's distended, and the distal part means the colon. Colon is relatively small or narrow. So it's relatively small or narrow. So point that this patient is having complete small bowel obstruction. What are the manifestations? We discussed in obstruction that in small bowel, if there is proximal obstruction, vomiting is more prominent. If there is distal obstruction, abdominal distension is more prominent. So in these patients, there is generalized abdominal distension. There is bilious vomiting and non-passage of what? Non-passage of meconium. And generally these cardinal features are seen after 24 to 48 hours of birth. So what are the cardinal features? Easy to remember. Cardinal features of meconium ileus. So cardinal features are generalized abdominal distension, bilious vomiting, failure of passage of meconium, and these cardinal features are generally seen within 24 to 48 hours of birth. 24 to 48 hours of birth. How we are going to make the diagnosis? So it's a case of small bowel obstruction. We go for plain X-ray abdomen, and on plain X-ray abdomen there is dilated bowel loops, presence of dilated bowel loops, and these bowel loops are placed centrally. Here you have to notice that there is absence of air fluid levels. So this is the appearance. You can see that on this plain X-ray abdomen there is presence of dilated bowel loops. There is absence of air fluid levels, and what is the characteristic appearance which you can see here? That is known as soap bubble. You can see on the right side of abdomen, meconium is mixed with gas, and this is known as soap bubble or ground glass appearance. So what are the characteristic findings seen on X-ray abdomen in meconium ileus? Dilated bowel loops. There is absence of air fluid levels. Why? Because meconium is mixed with air. So that's why there is appearance of soap bubble or ground glass appearance. So here also, just like meconium plug, which investigation is both diagnostic and therapeutic. Indirectly sometimes question is asked that what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis of meconium ileus, and it is water soluble contrast enema. So here also the investigation which is both diagnostic and therapeutic, this is water soluble contrast enema. Water soluble contrast enema, right? And when we give this water soluble contrast enema, patients are going to pass this inspissated meconium. But what's the problem? It is effective only in 75% patients. One problem. Second problem, I discussed that whenever we are giving this water soluble contrast enema, this is hypertonic solution. And if it is hypertonic solution, it is going to attract water in the lumen of bowel, and that can lead to hypovolemia. So we have to take this precaution that child should be adequately hydrated whenever we are using the water soluble contrast enema. So important points, what this is hypertonic solution, it's hypertonic solution. So what precaution we have to take? The child should be hydrated, child should be hydrated. Yes, one. Second problem, that it is effective only in 75% of patients. So in 75% of patients, after use of water soluble contrast enema, obstruction is relieved. Obstruction is relieved. Clear? Now see what happens to the rest of the patients. The patients in whom after use of water soluble contrast enema obstruction is not relieved, in these patients we go for surgical intervention. Now the problem, we perform enterotomy. So we give incision over the bowel, and what, we evacuate the inspissated meconium, and we perform irrigation of proximal as well as distal bowel. So here you can see we perform the enterotomy, incision over the bowel, and after that what, we are going to evacuate this inspissated meconium. So we evacuate the inspissated meconium and we perform the irrigation of proximal part of bowel and distal part of bowel. Clear? So what's the operative intervention? Operative intervention in meconium ileus. Okay, so we go for enterotomy, and after that simple evacuation of meconium. So evacuate the meconium and then perform the irrigation. So we perform irrigation of both proximal and distal part of bowel, and for this irrigation either we use warm normal saline or we use 4% acetylcysteine. You have to remember the percentage of acetylcysteine. So what are the fluids used? Either we can use warm saline or we can use 4% acetylcysteine. This question was asked 2 to 3 times in various entrance exams. Clear? So this is how we manage the patients of simple meconium ileus. Sometimes we are going to perform the enterostomy, means we perform ileostomy for irrigation. So what are the various names of ileostomy which are performed in patients of meconium ileus? So in the patients of meconium ileus, we can go for Paul Mikulicz double barrel ileostomy. Can you see 2 separate openings here? So this is double barrel, known as Paul Mikulicz double barrel ileostomy. In this diagram you can see this is the proximal part of small intestine and this is the distal part in which ileostomy is done. Proximal part, distal part. So in distal part, what, there is irrigation chimney. So here this is known as distal chimney ileostomy. And if it is performed in this proximal part, this is relatively proximal, this is distal, so this is known as proximal chimney ileostomy. What are the names? It is known as Bishop-Koop's. What's the name? This is Bishop-Koop's distal chimney ileostomy, and this is known as Santulli's proximal chimney ileostomy. So you have to remember the names because these names are asked in exams. Paul Mikulicz double barrel ileostomy, Bishop-Koop's distal chimney ileostomy, Santulli's proximal chimney ileostomy. What are the advantages of these surgical procedures or this kind of enterostomy? See, this enterostomy can be used for irrigation. So in post-operative period, we can use it for irrigation. And another advantage, that with these procedures, there is lowest possible bowel resection. So there is lowest possible bowel resection, and we can use this enterostomy or ileostomy for postoperative irrigation. Now, what is complicated meconium ileus? So we discussed when the meconium ileus is complicated by perforation. So when meconium ileus is complicated by perforation, it is known as complicated meconium ileus. This perforation can occur in utero, means during intrauterine life, or this can occur just after birth. So whenever there is perforation, obviously it leads to peritonitis. But what kind of peritonitis? It leads to aseptic chemical peritonitis. Why? Because now the meconium enters into the peritoneal cavity. So it leads to peritonitis. And what kind of peritonitis? It is aseptic chemical peritonitis. Aseptic chemical peritonitis. Clear? And because of this aseptic chemical peritonitis, why it is aseptic chemical peritonitis? Because here meconium enters into peritoneal cavity. So there is presence of meconium in peritoneal cavity. Clear? And because of presence of meconium in peritoneal cavity, it can lead to dense inflammatory adhesions, or it can lead to calcification. So problem, it can lead to dense inflammatory adhesions, okay, or it can lead to calcification. And there is one question related to this calcification. So if there is calcification and we are going to perform ultrasound, there is a characteristic appearance. And what's the name of that characteristic appearance? It's known as snowstorm sign. So because of this calcification on ultrasound, there is a characteristic appearance, and that's known as snowstorm sign. It's snowstorm sign. Now see, what are the clinical presentations of complicated meconium ileus? So clinical presentation. So in this case, since the meconium enters into peritoneal cavity, it can lead to meconium pseudocyst. There is adhesive peritonitis. We discussed initially it is aseptic, but later when there is secondary bacterial infection, it can be infected also, and it can lead to ascites. What are the findings on X-ray? So for diagnosis, see the findings on X-ray. So we discussed that there is calcification. So on X-ray also you will notice the specks of calcification. You will notice dilated bowel loops. So there are specks of calcification. There is presence of dilated bowel loops. Okay, and sometimes there is mass effect. And we discussed because of this calcification, what is the characteristic appearance on ultrasound? So on ultrasound, there is snowstorm appearance. The characteristic appearance, it's snowstorm appearance. Clear? Now coming to the management. See, most of these patients are managed conservatively. So what we give in such patients, we give enema and oral polyethylene glycol solution. So how we are going to manage the patients of complicated meconium ileus? Patients are managed conservatively. So there is conservative management, and what we give enema and oral polyethylene glycol solution. Okay, so this is how we manage the patients of complicated meconium ileus. Now we are going to discuss the rotational abnormalities. It's very, very important. To understand the rotational abnormalities, first you have to understand the embryology of rotation. So let's discuss the embryology first. So what happens at 5 weeks, there is rapid growth and elongation of midgut. And because of this rapid growth and elongation of midgut, what happens? There is herniation of midgut. and generally there is a stalk, and you can see the stalk is formed by superior mesenteric vessels, means superior mesenteric artery and superior mesenteric vein. So this is superior mesenteric artery. So at 5 weeks there is rapid growth and elongation of midgut leading to herniation of midgut. Now what happens in this midgut? There is 270-degree counterclockwise rotation. So there is 270-degree counterclockwise rotation, and because of this 270-degree counterclockwise rotation of midgut, what happens? Can you see? DJ flexure, duodenojejunal flexure. So it reaches the left upper quadrant. At what level? At the level of pyloric antrum. So it reaches at the level of pyloric antrum. Second thing, it is fixed to posterior abdominal wall by which ligament? By ligament of Treats. So DJ, what's the level of DJ flexure? Left upper quadrant at the level of antrum, pyloric antrum, and it is fixed to posterior abdominal wall by ligament of Treats. Now see, duodenum. This is the duodenum, and this is which part? Third part of duodenum. And here you can notice that there is one artery which is anterior to duodenum. So what is this artery? Superior mesenteric artery. So superior mesenteric artery is anterior to duodenum. It means the third part, it's like this. Superior mesenteric artery is going to cross the third part of duodenum. So duodenum is posterior to this superior mesenteric artery. This is normal. But what happens? There is another situation known as reverse rotation. In reverse rotation, at the place of counterclockwise rotation, there is clockwise rotation. So in this case, what will happen? The duodenum become anterior. So the third part of duodenum become anterior, and what happens? This is the superior mesenteric artery. So normally if you see this picture, here you can see that there is transverse colon. This is the superior mesenteric artery, and this is the third part of duodenum. Anteriorly transverse colon is there. Behind transverse colon there is superior mesenteric artery, and behind superior mesenteric artery there is third part of duodenum. But what happens in reverse rotation? Duodenum becomes anterior. Behind duodenum there is superior mesenteric artery, and behind superior mesenteric artery there is transverse colon. So this happens in reverse rotation. By the way, coming to normal embryology, so there is 270-degree counterclockwise rotation in midgut. Now see, these herniated loops are returning to the abdominal cavity, and when herniated loops returns to abdominal cavity, there is another 270-degree counterclockwise rotation. In which loop? In the cecocolic loop. So in the cecocolic loop there is another 270-degree counterclockwise rotation. So what is the effect? Because of this 270-degree counterclockwise rotation of cecocolic loop, see first, cecum is located in right lower quadrant. What is the exact position? Right iliac fossa. You can see this is descending colon, this is ascending colon. So ascending colon and descending colon, it is fixed to posterior abdominal wall. These are the sequence of events which are occurring during rotation. So let's quickly revise. At 5 weeks there is rapid growth and elongation of midgut leading to herniation of midgut, and the stalk is formed by superior mesenteric vessels. In the midgut there is 270-degree counterclockwise rotation. Because of this 270-degree counterclockwise rotation, DJ flexure is located at left upper quadrant, fixed to posterior abdominal wall by which ligament? Ligament of Treats, and duodenum becomes posterior to superior mesenteric artery. When herniated loops returns to abdominal cavity, in the cecocolic loop there is 270-degree counterclockwise rotation, and because of this 270-degree counterclockwise rotation, cecum is fixed in right lower quadrant. Ascending colon and descending colon are fixed to posterior abdominal wall. So this is normal embryology. So see, what are the types of rotational abnormalities? Types of rotational abnormalities. There are 5 types of rotational abnormalities. First is non-rotation. Non-rotation is the most common rotational abnormality. So first question is the most common rotational abnormality. Okay. Second is incomplete rotation, and the incomplete rotation is the most common type of malrotation. It's the most common type of malrotation. So read the question carefully in exam. Most common rotational abnormality is non-rotation, in which there is no rotation, and incomplete rotation. This is the most common type of malrotation. Reverse rotation. So what happens here? At the place of counterclockwise rotation, in reverse rotation there is clockwise rotation. At the place of counterclockwise rotation, here there is clockwise rotation. What happens in hyperrotation? We discussed how much was the counterclockwise rotation? 270 degree. So whenever the rotation is counterclockwise rotation is more than 270 degree, it is hyperrotation. And the fifth type is mixed rotation. We are going to discuss one by one. So first we are going to discuss the non-rotation. Non-rotation. And we discussed that this is the most common rotational abnormality. So in this case, what's the problem? There is failure of counterclockwise rotation after the return of midgut to the abdominal cavity. So what's the problem here? There is failure of counterclockwise rotation. Okay, after return of midgut. After return of midgut to abdominal cavity. Return of midgut to abdominal cavity. Okay, so see what are the abnormalities which are seen in non-rotation. Now see the abnormalities seen in non-rotation. It's the midline. This is the midline. Clear? And obviously this is the right side, this is the left side. So see what are the structures which are located on right side. You can see duodenum, you can see DJ, duodenojejunal junction, jejunum, part of ileum. So you notice that all these structures are located on the right side. And if you see cecum and rest of the large intestine, all these structures are located on the left side. One problem. Now here you can see this is the stalk found by superior mesenteric artery. So this is the stalk found by superior mesenteric artery. Okay, so over this pedicle formed by superior mesenteric artery, here you can see this is the proximal jejunum and this is the ascending colon. So proximal jejunum and ascending colon are fused on one pedicle, and that pedicle is formed by superior mesenteric artery. So what are the abnormalities seen in non-rotation? So here you can see C loop of duodenum, DJ, jejunum, ileum means small intestine, and this is the DJ, it means the ligament of Treats. It is also located on right side. So all these structures are located on the right side. Duodenum, C loop of duodenum, DJ, so ligament of Treats, small intestine. If you see cecum and large intestine, these are located on the left side. So here you saw cecum and rest of the large intestine located on left side. Now see, this is the proximal jejunum, this part, and this is the ascending colon. These are fused on one pedicle. And what is that pedicle? This pedicle is formed by superior mesenteric artery. So proximal jejunum and ascending colon, these are fused on single pedicle or one pedicle, and this pedicle is formed by superior mesenteric artery. Clear? So these are the abnormalities seen in non-rotation. Now see incomplete rotation. We discussed that incomplete rotation is the most common type of, it's the most common type of malrotation. So it's the most common type of malrotation, and it's written what? That rotation is incomplete. So in incomplete rotation, it is incomplete. So what is incomplete? The counterclockwise rotation, it is arrested around 180 degree. How much is the counterclockwise rotation? 270 degree. So it is incomplete. It means counterclockwise rotation. And this is arrested around 180 degree. Clear? It is arrested around 180 degree. So what are the abnormalities seen in incomplete rotation? Now again see, this is the midline. Clear? So this is right side and this is the left side. Simple. So here you can see most part of small intestine, can you see, it is located on the right side. Here you can see this is DJ, duodenojejunal flexure or duodenojejunal junction. So normally what is the location of DJ? It is located at the level of pyloric antrum and it is located on the left side of vertebral column. But here you can see that DJ is located on the right side of vertebral column. Now here you can see there is presence of Latz bands. And these Latz bands are going to compress the duodenum, and because of that duodenum is having corkscrew configuration. Now see, the major part of large intestine, it is located on which side? It's located on right side or left side. So major part of large intestine, it is located on left side. And you can see the position of cecum is abnormal. What is the location? Can you see? Normal location of cecum is right lower quadrant. But here, cecum is close to the midline. Abnormal location and it is close to the midline. Here you can see that this is the ascending colon. So there is failure of fixation of this ascending colon in right hypochondrium. And you can notice that because of this, there is presence of Latz band. And you can see there is narrow intestinal mesentery. So can you see? There is narrow intestinal mesentery. So these are the abnormalities. So what are the abnormalities seen in incomplete rotation? Abnormalities seen in incomplete rotation. So here you can see small intestine. It is located on which side? Right side. We discussed DJ flexure. It is located on right side of vertebral column. So it's located on right side of vertebral column. Duodenum, what kind of configuration? It's having corkscrew configuration. Why? Because of compression by duodenum. Large intestine is located on which side? So large intestine mainly located on left side. Normally the position of cecum is in right lower quadrant, but here it's abnormal and you saw that it is close to the midline. So it is abnormal and it's close to the midline. Right colon, it is more medial. Can you see here? This is the right colon, clear, and it is more medial. Okay, and there is failure of fixation of ascending colon in right hypochondrium. Because of that, there are two problems. What? One, that there is narrow intestinal mesentery. Narrow intestinal mesentery. And what? Second problem, that there is presence of Latz bands. There is presence of Latz bands. So these are the abnormalities seen in incomplete rotation. Another question which is commonly asked is that what is Latz bands? Latz bands are also commonly asked. Latz bands are the retroperitoneal attachments, and these bands are going to fix cecum and ascending colon to the posterior abdominal wall. So generally what happens, it extends from duodenum, exactly from right upper quadrant, and it goes to cecum and ascending colon. Why? Because these bands are going to fix the cecum and ascending colon to posterior abdominal wall. So here you can see these are the Latz bands and these are retroperitoneal attachments. Clear? Now see this image and tell me what kind of rotation is this, or what kind of rotational abnormality is this. So you can notice that this is superior mesenteric artery, and you can notice that the third part of duodenum is anterior to superior mesenteric artery and the transverse colon is posterior to superior mesenteric artery. It means at the place of 270 degree counterclockwise rotation, what happens here? There is clockwise rotation. So what kind of abnormality is this? This is reverse rotation. So this is reverse rotation. Okay, so what happens in reverse rotation? Part of rotation occurs in clockwise direction. In this case, part of rotation, and it occurs in clockwise direction. Generally, rotation occurs in anti-clockwise direction or counterclockwise direction, and how much? 270 degree. So because of this, what happens? You can see abnormalities seen. So here you can notice that duodenum is anterior. Duodenum is anterior to superior mesenteric artery. Clear? And you can notice that transverse colon, this is posterior to superior mesenteric artery. Next is hyperrotation, and we discussed that in hyperrotation the counterclockwise rotation occurs for more than 270 degree. So whenever there is counterclockwise rotation, and how much is the counterclockwise rotation? It's more than 270 degree. And what is the effect of this counterclockwise rotation more than 270 degree? The cecum, which is normally located in right lower quadrant, it goes into left hypochondrium. So what's the abnormality seen here? The cecum, it's located in left hypochondrium. Located in left hypochondrium in hyperrotation. This was the question which was asked in AIIMS long back, and it was repeated 2 to 3 times. It's a type of rotational abnormality known as mixed rotation. What was the question in AIIMS? In the question, it was asked that cecum is located just below stomach in the midline. Cecum is located just below stomach in the midline, and this abnormality is seen in which type of malrotation? So it is seen in mixed rotation. What's the problem here? In mixed rotation, the intestine doesn't rotate when it enters to abdomen after physiological hernia. So problem? In this case, the intestine doesn't rotate. It doesn't rotate. Okay, when it enters into abdomen, when it enters abdomen after physiological hernia. Okay, after physiological hernia. This is the problem. And because of this, what is the abnormality? Cecum is in the midline, located just below the stomach. Exactly which structure? It is located just below pylorus. So the abnormality, cecum is in the midline, located just below the pylorus. Another problem, that if a patient is having mixed rotation, that patient is very prone to develop valvulus. So what are the problems? Abnormalities. So what's the abnormalities seen here? You notice that the cecum, it is located in midline. Clear? And where exactly? Inferior to pylorus, means stomach. Inferior to pylorus. Clear? And because of these abnormalities, in mixed rotation, there is increased risk of volvulus. Clear? So these are the types of rotational abnormalities. And now we are going to discuss clinical manifestations and management of malrotation. Okay, so important points related to malrotation. First question, that what is the incidence of clinically symptomatic malrotation? Be careful, statement is incidence of clinically symptomatic malrotation, and this is 1 in 6,000 live births. So statement, incidence of clinically symptomatic malrotation. Okay, and this one is 1 in 6,000 live births. Now see, you have to remember certain percentages. First, that the patients who are having malrotation, how many patients are having associated GI abnormalities? So 30 to 60% patients are having associated GI abnormalities. In 90% patients, what the symptoms are going to develop before 1 year of age. In 90% of patients, symptoms develop before 1 year of age. And see, 50 to 75% of patients, these patients are brought to the hospital within first month of life. So the patients who are having malrotation, 50 to 75% patients are brought to the hospital within first month of life. Now there can be three presentations in these patients. First, patient is asymptomatic. So how we are going to make the diagnosis? It is diagnosed incidentally on radiological investigations, or after death, sometimes it is detected on autopsy. Second situation, patient is having malrotation without volvulus. So if patient is having malrotation without volvulus, these patients are symptomatic. So what is the symptom? These patients are having chronic abdominal pain. Sometimes there is vomiting and there is failure to thrive. And third, the most dangerous situation, that with malrotation patient is going to develop what? Volvulus. This is an emergency situation, and these patients are having acute onset of bilious vomiting. Okay, so see the clinical manifestations. First, broadly, patient can be asymptomatic or patient can be symptomatic. Simple. Right? Now, how these asymptomatic patients are detected? So these are diagnosed in these patients. Malrotation is diagnosed incidentally on radiological investigations, or sometimes detected during autopsy. Okay, in the symptomatic patients there are two categories. One, there is malrotation without volvulus. Clear? And the second, there is malrotation with volvulus. So there is malrotation with volvulus. Clear? The patients who are not having volvulus, these patients are having chronic abdominal pain. Sometimes there can be bilious vomiting. So there is generally chronic abdominal pain plus minus bilious vomiting. Okay, and generally in these patients there is no weight gain. So generally there is failure to thrive. Failure to thrive. This is the emergency situation in which there is volvulus. Because of this volvulus, what happens? There is bilious vomiting. And sometimes bilious vomiting is the only manifestation of volvulus. So there is bilious vomiting. Okay. Rest of the manifestations are dependent whether patient was brought early to the hospital or there was delayed presentation. Suppose there is delayed presentation, patient was brought late. So if there is delayed presentation, in these patients there is presence of systemic signs and symptoms. So because of delayed presentation, the patients are having systemic signs and symptoms. Like the patients are having lethargy, there is poor perfusion. Because of this poor perfusion, there is decreased urine output. Because of poor perfusion, there is anaerobic metabolism, so there is lactic acidosis, and this leads to metabolic acidosis, and metabolic acidosis leads to cardiopulmonary compromise. So problem C, these patients can develop lethargy, there is poor perfusion, and because of this poor perfusion there is decreased urine output. Clear? There is lactic acidosis leading to metabolic acidosis, and because of this metabolic acidosis there is cardiopulmonary compromise. Cardiopulmonary compromise. Okay, these are the manifestations. Now, how we are going to investigate? First, we are sending the laboratory investigations, and in laboratory investigations, you find what? Metabolic acidosis we discussed. Apart from metabolic acidosis, these patients are having thrombocytopenia and leukopenia. So see the diagnosis. What are the findings on laboratory investigations? Clear? So these patients have metabolic acidosis, there is leukopenia, right? And there is thrombocytopenia. So there is thrombocytopenia. Okay. Now see, acute onset of bilious vomiting in a neonate. Acute onset of bilious vomiting in a neonate is highly suggestive of malrotation. So in such patients, we have to rule out malrotation. How we want to rule out malrotation? By radiological investigations. We are supposed to focus on two structures. First, see the ligament of Treats. So see the location of ligament of Treats. What's the location? It is located left side of vertebral column, posterior to stomach. And second, we want to see the location of cecum. So what's the normal location? It is located in right lower quadrant. So we want to look for location of ligament of Treats and cecum, right? For location of ligament of Treats, which investigation is done? We perform upper GI series or upper GI contrast study. Okay. And for cecum, we can perform what? Barium enema. Right? Now the problem. Generally, barium enema is not the part of diagnostic protocol of malrotation. Why? We saw in various types of malrotation that in certain types, the position of cecum can normal. It means normal position of cecum cannot rule out malrotation. That's why we don't include barium enema as a part of diagnostic protocol. And ligament of Treats location is always abnormal in patients of malrotation, and that's why we include upper GI series. Second advantage, this upper GI series can also diagnose the volvulus. So upper GI series is going to tell you the location of ligament of Treats. It's abnormal in malrotation. Second, it will tell you about the complication, which is volvulus. So what are the findings of volvulus on upper GI series? So there is corkscrew configuration of upper part of small intestine. And second, there is bird beak appearance of which part? Third part of duodenum. Clear? So on upper GI series, what are the findings which are seen in volvulus? Corkscrew configuration of upper part of small intestine, and there is bird beak appearance at third part of duodenum. We discussed this bird beak appearance. We discussed that bird beak appearance on barium swallow. It is seen in which condition? Achalasia cardia. Bird beak appearance on barium enema. It is seen in sigmoid volvulus, and bird beak appearance on upper GI series. It is seen in volvulus. So see three important questions. Bird beak appearance on barium swallow. It is seen in achalasia cardia. Okay. Bird beak appearance on upper GI series. This is seen in midgut volvulus. And bird beak appearance on barium enema. This is seen in sigmoid volvulus. It's seen in sigmoid volvulus. Now coming to the management, it's very easy to remember. See, if a patient is acutely ill and there is peritonitis, what we go for? We go for emergency exploratory laparotomy. Why there is peritonitis? Because patient is having perforation. Second problem, patient is symptomatic because of volvulus, and this volvulus leads to obstruction. So we have to do the stabilization. We give IV fluids, IV antibiotics. We go for proximal nasogastric aspiration, and then we take the patient for exploratory laparotomy. Third situation, patient is having chronic symptoms, or patient is having no symptoms, patient was diagnosed incidentally. In these cases, we go for planned elective surgery. And what is the name of preferred operative procedure done for the patients of malrotation? It is the LADS procedure. So how we manage the patients? Management. First, acutely ill patient. Patient is acutely ill with peritonitis. So there is peritonitis. So in such patients, we go for what? Emergency exploratory laparotomy. Exploratory laparotomy. Second situation, that patient is symptomatic, means malrotation patient, and there is volvulus. So this is also an emergency, but we have to resuscitate the patients. So in such patients we give IV fluids and IV antibiotics, go for proximal gastric decompression and emergency surgery. And if the patient is having chronic symptoms or patient is symptom free, chronic symptoms or patient is symptom free, here we go for elective surgery. And what is the standard operative procedure? The name of this procedure is LADS procedure. So this is elective surgery, and the name of procedure, that's the LADS procedure. Sometimes the questions are asked related to LADS procedure. So see what is done in LADS procedures. These patients, if they have volvulus, first we have to go for reduction of volvulus. So can you see here? The surgeon is performing the reduction of volvulus. So first, perform the reduction of volvulus. After that, these are the LADS bands, retroperitoneal attachments, which is going to fix cecum and ascending colon. So we have to divide the LADS bands. And second, to avoid diagnostic confusion later, we have to remove the appendix also. So we divide LADS bands and we perform appendectomy. After that, we have to perform the positioning of intestine, and we can go for fixation if it is required. So how we position? You see here, duodenum, proximal part of jejunum. Duodenum and proximal part of jejunum, it is placed on the right side. And if you see, this is the terminal ileum, this is cecum. So generally terminal ileum and cecum, it is placed on the left side. So what are the components of LADS procedure? Reduction of volvulus, division of LADS bands, and to avoid diagnostic confusion we perform appendectomy, and then positioning of intestine. Duodenum and proximal jejunum, it is placed on right side, and terminal ileum and cecum, it is placed on left side. Now we are going to discuss anorectal malformations. What is the incidence of anorectal malformations? It is 1 in 5,000 live births, and anorectal malformations are more common in boys. So two important statements. First, what's the incidence? So incidence of anorectal malformations, it's 1 in 5,000. 1 in 5,000 live births, okay, and it's more common in boys. More common in boys. Now what is the range of anorectal malformation? It ranges from anal stenosis to cloaca. So what's the range? It ranges from anal stenosis, okay, and the most severe defect is what? Cloaca, or malformation is cloaca. Now see what is the most common defect in anorectal malformations. So it is imperforate anus with fistula. Where is the fistula in boys? It is between distal colon and urethra. And where is the fistula in girls? It is between distal colon and vestibule of vagina. Okay. So what's the most common defect in anorectal malformations? This is a frequently asked question. So this is imperforate anus. Imperforate anus with fistula. Okay. Now you have to remember this because this is important. Where is the fistula in boys and where is the fistula in girls? So in boys, the fistula is between distal colon. It's between distal colon and urethra. Okay. and in girls it is between distal colon and vestibule of vagina. Okay, so in girls it is between distal colon and vestibule of vagina. Okay, these are important points which are frequently asked. Before discussing anorectal malformation in detail, you should understand the important points related to embryology. Now see the important points related to embryology of development of urinary tract and genital tract. Now see, by 6th week of gestation, the urorectal septum, it moves caudally. And when it is going to move caudally, there is a cloaca. This cloaca is divided into anterior urogenital sinus and posterior anorectal canal. So urorectal septum, it is going to divide cloaca into anterior urogenital sinus and posterior anorectal canal. Now in certain patients, what's the problem? There is failure of formation of urorectal septum. And if there is failure of formation of urorectal septum, in these cases there is formation of fistula. So here you can see, if there is failure of formation of urorectal septum, where is the fistula? So we discussed that in boys the fistula is there between bowel, means distal colon, and urethra. So here you can see it's between bowel and urinary tract in boys, and in girls it is between bowel and vagina. Clear? So whenever there is failure of formation of urorectal septum, there is formation of fistula, and you saw the location in boys and girls. Now see the another situation. If there is complete or partial failure of anal membrane to resorb, and this leads to anal membrane stenosis. So in this situation there is anal membrane stenosis. So if there is failure of anal membrane to resorb. Second situation, in certain situations there is breakdown of cloacal membrane. Okay, so whenever there is breakdown of cloacal membrane anywhere along its course, what happens? There is anteriorly displaced anus. Anteriorly displaced anus. Okay, what do you mean by anteriorly displaced anus? Here the external anal opening is anterior to external sphincter. Clear? So these are the important points related to embryology and the practical application of embryology into the anorectal malformation. Now how we are going to manage the patients of anorectal malformation? Very important point. First you have to see whether this patient is having high lesion or low lesion. What is the meaning of high lesion or low lesion? See, if the termination of rectum is above pelvic floor, this is high, and if the termination of rectum is below pelvic floor, it is the low lesion. So how we are going to assess whether this is high lesion or low lesion? We are supposed to perform one investigation, and that's known as invertogram. This is frequently asked in exam. Now see, this investigation is invertogram. Okay, and generally it is performed after how many hours? At least 6 hours. So usually we are going to perform it 6 to 12 hours after birth. Okay, in exam generally they ask you that at least how many hours after birth you can perform it. You have to remember it can be performed at least 6 hours after birth. Okay, the name is invertogram. So we have to hold the baby in upside down position. So baby is turned in upside down position. Hold the baby for 3 minutes in this upside down position, and we are going to place a coin at the site of expected anus. So this is the site of expected anus. Clear? Here we are going to place a coin, right? And then we have to measure the distance between the gas and this coin. So gas is going to rise in the distal part of large intestine. So on the basis of this you can assess whether patient is having the high lesion or low lesion. So in high lesion the rectum ends above levator ani complex, and in low lesion it is going to end or terminate below levator ani complex. Now see the various types of anorectal malformations, but for that you have to understand first the normal anatomy. So this is the normal anatomy of female. What you have to notice here: rectum. Second, you can see this is the external sphincter muscle, and notice anus, and then this is vaginal opening. Clear? This is bladder. This is the normal anatomy. Now see here, these are the types of anorectal malformations seen in females. Okay, see the first condition. Here you can see that there is missing anal opening, right? And what? There is no external opening. So what? It is missing or it is closed off. So can you see anus? The anal opening is missing. If you see the second one here, you can notice that there is anteriorly displaced anus. So opening is in the wrong place. And if you notice this anteriorly displaced anus, it is having anal stenosis also. So what is the second type here? The opening is in the wrong place and it's too small. So there is stenosis. Now see the third situation. Here you can notice that rectum is connected to vagina. Can you see here? So in third, you can notice that rectum is connected to the vagina. And if you see this fourth condition, here you can see this is rectum. Here you can see this is vagina. And you can see this is the urethra. Urethra, vagina, rectum, all these are having a common opening, and this is known as what? Cloaca. So all three means rectum, vagina and urethra forms a single opening. This is the most severe anorectal malformation. So these are the four types of anorectal malformations seen in females. Now see what kind of anorectal malformations which are seen in males. Now see the normal anatomy in males also. You can see rectum here. Then this is the external sphincter muscles. You can see the normal anus. This is bladder. Okay. Now see what are the kinds of anorectal malformations seen in males. So see, first there is missing anal opening. Okay. So there is no anal opening. It's missing. So first it's missing or it's closed off. Now see the second situation. Here also you can notice that there is anteriorly displaced anus. It means the opening is in wrong place. And second, there is stenosis. Means it is too small. If you see the third situation, here you can see rectum, it's opening into urethra. So in third, rectum connects to urethra and sometimes it is connected to the bladder. And if you see this fourth condition, here you can see this is high rectum. Clear? And this high rectum is connected to the bladder. So these are the four anorectal malformations which are seen in boys. Now see, whenever we are performing the clinical examination, there are certain clinical clues which suggest whether the patient is having high lesion or low lesion. So first see, what are the clinical clues of high lesion? Clinical clues of high lesion. Okay, so generally whenever we are performing the evaluation, these patients are having flat bottom, means poorly developed pelvic floor muscles, and there can be meconiuria. So these patients have flat bottom, right? So there is poor muscle structures, and generally patients who are having flat bottom, these patients have very high defects. Second, meconiuria. So bracket meco plus nuria. Meconium is coming in urine, that is meconiuria. How meconium starts coming into urine? It means there is communication between bowel and urinary tract. So there is communication between rectum and urinary tract, and this is also suggestive of high lesion. Now see, what are the clinical clues suggestive of low lesion? Clinical clues which are suggestive of low lesion. First, Certain patients are having bucket handle deformity. What is this bucket handle deformity? There is prominent midline skin tag stem tab, and beneath this bucket handle deformity we can pass an instrument. Sometimes there is midline raphe fistula. There can be perineal fistula. How will you get to know that the patient is having perineal fistula? You will notice that there is meconium coming out through a small opening anterior to anal dimple. Sometimes there is anal stenosis we discussed, there is narrowed anal canal, and there is anal membrane. What is anal membrane? It's a thin membrane through which you can see the meconium. So these are the clinical clues suggestive of low lesion. Now see how the management differs in high lesion and low lesion. So see the management. High lesion and low lesion. In high lesion, first we have to go for protective colostomy. And after performing protective colostomy, after 4 to 8 weeks, we can go for posterior sagittal anorectoplasty. That is also known as PSARP. So what we do? First we go for protective colostomy. And after protective colostomy, we go for PSARP. Generally after 4 to 8 weeks of protective colostomy. Full form, it is posterior sagittal anorectoplasty. What is sufficient in low lesions? Here we perform perineal anoplasty. So for low lesions, we perform perineal anoplasty. Okay, so this is the basic principle of management. So let's discuss the flow chart of management of anorectal malformations in boys and in girls. So first let's discuss the anorectal malformation in males. In males, first we have to rule out associated abnormalities. So rule out associated abnormalities, and after that we have to perform the cross stable lateral film or invertogram, and we discussed after how many hours at least it's performed. So it's performed at least after 6 hours of birth. So there are 3 situations. First, if the patient is having perineal fistula, so in this case what we perform anoplasty. If patient is having perineal fistula, we perform anoplasty. Now see, rectal gas below coccyx and there is no associated defects. In these cases, we can go for posterior sagittal anorectoplasty. Okay, with or without protective colostomy. So sometimes we need colostomy. So if we need, we can go for protective colostomy. But here mainstay of treatment is that we can go for posterior sagittal anorectoplasty. But if rectal gas is above coccyx, there is associated defect. If there is abnormal sacrum and there is flat bottom, can you see these 2 features? Rectal gas above coccyx and flat bottom, these are suggestive of high lesions. And we discussed the management that in such cases, first we have to go for protective colostomy followed by PSARP. So generally in such cases, we go for protective colostomy followed by PSARP. So generally after 4 to 8 weeks we perform posterior sagittal anorectoplasty. So this is how we manage anorectal malformations in males. Now in anorectal malformations in females also, we have to rule out the potentially lethal associated defect. So rule out potentially lethal associated defects. Okay. Now see, these are the 4 situations. First, cloaca. Cloaca means we discussed there is a single perineal orifice. So in such cases, we go for urological evaluation. Urological evaluation. Clear? And second, we have to rule out hydrocolpos. So what? Rule out hydrocolpos. Clear? After that, since there is cloaca, we have to go for colostomy. If there is hydrocolpos, you have to drain hydrocolpos. Drain hydrocolpos. And sometimes it is necessary to divert the urine. So we have to perform urinary diversion if it's necessary. Urinary diversion if it's required. In patients who are having perineal fistula, what is sufficient? In such patients, we go for anoplasty. Clear? And if patient is having vestibular fistula, here two options are there. Either we can go for colostomy followed by delayed repair, or we can go for primary repair. So two options. Either we can go for colostomy or we can go for primary repair. Clear? Now imagine there is no visible fistula. So in such cases, we have to wait for 24 hours. And after waiting for 24 hours, we have to perform what? Cross-table lateral X-ray. So perform cross-table lateral X-ray. Okay. Now there are two situations, whether rectum is below coccyx or it is above coccyx. So two situations. One, rectum below coccyx, and second, rectum above coccyx. It means it's high rectum. High rectum. So if rectum is below coccyx, we can go for posterior sagittal anorectoplasty. In certain cases, colostomy is required. So plus minus colostomy. But if patient is having high lesion, there is high rectum, here we have to go for colostomy followed by PSARP, and that is done after 4 to 8 weeks. Clear? So colostomy followed by PSARP after 4 to 8 weeks. Clear? So this is how we manage anorectal malformations in females. Now see this image and tell me what is the diagnosis. So you can notice that this is what? Sacrococcygeal teratoma. And let me tell you, teratomas are most common in neonatal period. And what is the most common site? Obviously, this is the site. So this is sacrococcygeal region. So one by one we are going to discuss. This is sacrococcygeal teratoma. Clear? Teratomas, these are most frequently seen in neonatal period. Most frequently seen in neonatal period. And what's the most common site? Yes, you can see it is the sacrococcygeal region. Okay. Generally, sacrococcygeal teratoma, it is more common in males or females. So it is more common in females. You see, most teratomas which are seen in neonatal period, these teratomas are benign. But see the problem, the risk of malignancy increases with age. So there was one question which was asked in PGI Chandigarh, that sacrococcygeal teratoma are thought to be derivative of primitive streak. So three important points. First, most teratoma in neonatal period, these are benign. Risk of malignancy increases with age, and sacrococcygeal teratoma is thought to be derivative of primitive streak. Now see this lesion. You can see that mainly there is external presacral mass with minimal intrapelvic presacral component. So here you can see the clinical manifestation. You can see that mainly there is external presacral mass with minimal intrapelvic presacral component. Minimal intrapelvic presacral component. Okay, so mainly it's external. Now see the location. It is involving sacrum and coccygeal region. So these patients are having what? Weakness, paralysis, bladder bowel dysfunction. So patients are having weakness, paralysis and bladder bowel dysfunction. Another important point, how you are going to make the diagnosis. So just by looking at the child, you are going to make the diagnosis because it is so obvious. So diagnosis is made clinically. It's clinical diagnosis. We have to perform CT and MRI. So why we have to perform CT and MRI? To assess the intra-abdominal or intra-pelvic component. So to assess intra-abdominal and intra-pelvic component, we perform CT or MRI. So I'm repeating. Sacrococcygeal teratoma, its clinical diagnosis. For assessment of intra-abdominal or pelvic component, we have to go for what? CT or MRI. Now see the treatment. We have to go for complete surgical excision. Okay, so the tumor should be excised completely and resection of coccyx is critical. If you are going to leave coccyx, there is very high risk of local recurrence. So complete surgical excision of teratoma with excision of coccyx. So see the treatment of sacrococcygeal teratoma. We perform complete surgical excision of tumor. Clear? An important point, resection of coccyx is critical. Resection of coccyx, this is critical. Why? To decrease the local recurrence, to avoid the local recurrence, because the cases in which coccyx is left, there is high rate of local recurrence. In PGI Chandigarh, there was one question. And what was the question? Currarino triad. Okay, so it is related to sacrococcygeal teratoma. What are the components of Currarino triad? The components are anorectal malformations. These patients have sacrococcygeal osseous defect and there is presacral mass. So these are the components of Currarino triad and this completes the pediatric surgery.